Our native land, our native land, our native, our native, our native land. Hiya, hiya, our native land.
Hi everybody, Chad Leo here, host of Our Native Land through Czech Podcast Studios in Victoria, British Columbia. Before we get started with today's guests, I would like to do a territory acknowledgement. I acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory Czech Studio stands upon, and to all of the Indigenous tribes that are part of the Coast Salish, New Channel, and Kwakwaka'wakw on Vancouver Island. I thank these nations and traditional land keepers for allowing us to live, work, and play on their lands. And again, thank you, the viewer, for tuning in to another episode of Our Native Land. Today, we have the Minister of Indigenous Services, the Honorable Marc Miller, here to celebrate Indigenous Day with us. So, the Honorable Marc Miller was first elected in 2015 as the Member of Parliament for Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest, Île-de-Sœur in Montréal. Before entering politics, Minister Miller was a practicing lawyer. He specialized in mergers and acquisitions with a focus on international and commercial law and worked in Montreal, Stockholm, and New York City. Previously, he served as an infantry soldier in the Canadian Armed Forces. As a Member of Parliament, Minister Miller made history in 2017 when he delivered a statement in the House of Commons entirely in Mohawk, marking the first time the language had been spoken either in the House of Commons or the Senate since Confederation. He has also been a forceful advocate for increased federal investment in affordable housing, public transit, and the Canada Child Benefit Program. Minister Miller has been involved in several charitable and pro bono legal initiatives. He's also authored articles on constitutional and human rights law. Minister Miller is a graduate of the Université de Montréal, where he earned a master's and bachelor's degree in political science. He also graduated from the McGill University with degrees in common law and civil law. Minister Miller was born and raised in Montréal and is the current Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, and he is here to celebrate National Indigenous Day with Czech and Vancouver Island. Minister Marc, welcome to Our Native Land.
Thanks for having me on, Chad. I'm joining you from Ottawa and the traditional territory of the Algonquin people.
Thank you so much for joining us. That's fantastic. Okay, let's get started with the show here. So I just want to start with the conversation with you about the stuff your office has been doing since you've been sworn into the Indigenous Services Office November 20th, 2019.
Yeah, well, look, I've been a minister for about a year and a half, and it's been we always say unprecedented about a lot of things, but we've faced in the last year and some a world pandemic that, unless you're in the 80s or 90s, haven't faced before. And it is something that this is the reality that I've known as a minister of the Crown. So people say it's unique, but it's all I know. But what I do know is that from day one, I've been working hard with my team to keep people safe and alive. I suppose if the Prime Minister had asked me what my ambition was when he asked me to serve in this role, and I'd said to keep people safe and alive, that would have sounded there and then. And
it would have sounded a little bit odd, yeah.
It would have sounded like horribly unambitious.
Yeah. But
the reality is that's we're the state in, and that's what my team has been working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, focused on. First, at the outset of the pandemic, getting information out to communities that have less resources than a similarly situated non-Indigenous community, and making sure that we're every step of the way dealing with the uncertainty that was COVID, still is COVID, making sure communities, Indigenous communities across Canada have the network and the resources, financial backing in Canada to keep their people safe.
Absolutely. Well, that being said, I did want to talk a bit about COVID, the COVID concerns. What's sort of the temperature like currently? I'm talking to here in the middle, just about the middle of May, and how have you interpreted what's going on so far in regards to what your department's doing in order to ensure the vaccine rollout's going as smoothly as it can, and helping all of the Indigenous communities across Canada that need access to these vaccines and proper health care?
And I guess just for your listeners to chart the course of where we've seen it from Ottawa, I have a pretty unique picture of the whole country. I'm not in a community helping fight it, but I do see a very privileged snapshot of what that looks like. And I've seen wave 1, wave 2, and wave 3 hit. Wave 1, Indigenous communities were prepared. They know best how to protect their own people. Just a question of getting resources and facilities and communication out into communities so that they could take the decisions they wanted to protect their people. And did marvelously. I think after wave 1, only about, I have the on reserve numbers, so it's much larger when you talk about the urban population. So if people want to talk about numbers, the numbers I'm going to give out are going to sound low because they only deal with the quote unquote on reserve numbers, but about 400. And then wave two hit really hard. Economies in the provinces opened up. People would probably say prematurely, and it hit communities hard. There was a real scary point in and around December where communities in northern Manitoba were getting really just overwhelmed through no fault of their own by increasing cases of COVID and things starting to shut down. So we acted quite quickly to deploy the military. But wave two, to summarize, hit quite hard. We learned from that. We continuously adapted. I think all my team used to wake up every morning wondering how we can go faster than a disease that moves faster than government. In getting resources out in the communities in the right way, in a culturally respectful way. And then as we got a safe and reliable suite of vaccines into the country, making sure that those that are the most vulnerable, despite being strong, resilient, and very proud communities, that vulnerability can't be denied because of, for historical reasons, overcrowding and such, worse health outcomes with respect to lower infrastructure and investments in Indigenous communities, socioeconomic gaps that we all know and talk about in government and in communities. Making sure those resources were there. The vaccine was deployed in a way that prioritized Indigenous peoples, so that that was another set of tools in the tool belt to fight COVID. And the remark, I mean, you probably see your snapshot from BC and First Nations Health Authority that is putting out really good numbers as to how that got deployed out into communities and the effect that that has had in driving down COVID. And it's very hard for anyone to proclaim victory because we're still not out of it. But this is a real success and a testament to the work that's been done in communities to keep COVID low. And so it's something that we need to remind ourselves that as we continue to sort of fight brush fires as they come up and keep vigilant through sort of cautious reopening throughout the summer and perhaps the fall.
Absolutely. I did notice once, the vaccine was rolling out, I was quite surprised and pleased to see there's some Indigenous communities that are so remote that may only have, 15, 20, 30 members, and getting the vaccine out to them was I think, quite quick and diligent. So I was quite impressed with that. The reception you're getting from, Indigenous leaders and chiefs in return, or the communications you're having with these Indigenous tribes, have they generally been positive? Is there an openness to continue, receiving these vaccines and making sure that they're fighting any misconceptions or misinformation regarding the vaccine? Has that been positive?
Generally, it has. When there is a crisis, it's important to get on the line and talk to the people on the ground that need resources now, then, and perhaps obviously yesterday. So, the leadership has been very, very, very participative and leading, frankly, in making sure that COVID doesn't get in the communities, and when it does, gets stomped out pretty quickly through sometimes quite difficult measures of isolation, tracking in communities. This is a relationship that is very much one that is based on trust that is thin towards the federal government with good reason at times. If you look at the whole historical legacy, I believe that our teams have been able to build some trust in making sure that we are supporting communities in the difficult decisions they take, whether it's closing down communities, perimeter security, food security, supporting increasing nursing capacity. This is a national. As you're recording this is National Nurses Week. So important to lift up Indigenous nurses that have done such a great job in protecting their own and delivering vaccines in a culturally sensitive way and healthcare in a culturally sensitive way. So it's something that I want to highlight. It gives me an immense amount of joy to see very, very remote communities going through ceremony as they welcome people in and vaccinate, first and foremost, the elderly, the knowledge keepers, language keepers, and then encouraging the youth. I mean, what we've seen currently as a trend is really good uptake in the elder groups, younger groups. They're getting there. And with the second shot, sometimes takes a little longer, but we have to be relentless about this and getting information out. And vaccine acceptancy, whether you want to talk about the history of hesitancy and the real apprehension with respect to the medical system, you overcome that by communication and as much information you can, often in languages that aren't English and French, Indigenous languages that have been here long before my ancestors were. And so those are all things you have to compose with and be relentless in offering people the right solution, which is to go out there and get the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more relentless and the more communication, like you said, I think the better the result will come. Absolutely.
And it
And
doesn't come from a guy like me. It comes from, trusted elders, trusted immunizers, people that are known within the community and that people have known for years and that have that set of skills that I obviously don't have, or that connection to the people that are being asked to get vaccinated.
For sure, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, we've been talking about the vaccine. It's very, it's a very imminent concern. And just to know for the viewers, we are recording this in the middle of the May, and we are airing this on Indigenous Day and an Indigenous Week, so a month away. But that being said, we hope by the time this airs that things are looking better as we get through this pandemic together. So besides the pandemic, there are other plans for the department. I had a chance to take a look at the department plan you had written for, at the beginning of 2021. So I just want to read it for you and then talk about it. So I know you wrote it, but we're going to talk about it. The respect of the land and water, the importance of Indigenous languages and the cultural practices, and honoring all aspects of life and the environment, including the conditions of which people are born, grow, live, and work, are well understood with the traditional Indigenous approaches to well-being. Our path forward must be Indigenous-led, community-based, and culturally safe. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities are entitled to first-class infrastructure, healthcare, social services, and opportunities, as do all other Canadians. I want to talk and how that relates to some of the forefront issues that make the news often, that are top of mind for people. How does that relate to First Nation communities that are still struggling to have the clean water, to have the proper health care, and then necessities of life to continue living comfortably?
Yeah, and wow, that's it's an excellent question, and unpacking that I think is the challenge. I think it's important to recognize that plan is very much aspirational. That is not the way that our government and our department certainly has not behaved in the past. What we've learned throughout the pandemic is that if we trust those that know their people's best, the outcomes are measurable and tangible. There's one thing saying it, and then also one thing doing it. I think what, if anything, this pandemic has proven so far is now we have clear proof points that locally crafted solution with the best medical advice available, coupled with eons of Indigenous knowledge, give better outcomes, health outcomes, mental health outcomes. How we've behaved in the past certainly isn't a testament to that. It's been quite the opposite. I do take a lot of heart in the way we have deployed a number of measures, whether it's being relentless, to my earlier point on getting water into communities. BC and Semiahmoo lifted its last long-term water advisory about a month ago. So that's great news for BC, but there's more news to come for places like Northern Ontario that still have a good chunk of those water advisories. Making sure we accompany communities that take that decision, lift long-term water advisories in the way that they choose. You can understand that a community that has been on a water advisory for 25 years may want to take a little longer in lifting that advisory, despite the fact that the water is quote unquote clean, because you've had a generation grow up with that apprehension. That's something we need to understand their perspective, because a guy in my position may wonder why that is the case. So it means a lot more listening than someone like me has grown up accustomed to. One of the best advice I think I got as when I became minister from one of my colleagues in Parliament who is Indigenous was to keep my mouth shut a little more often. And listen, I'm conscious I'm saying this when I'm talking, but
yeah, don't stop talking now. We got some more time.
But it's certainly something that I take to heart. We as a department want to do things in the right way. There are examples of that. There are also counter examples. One of the great examples that we've seen really show results is throughout COVID, offer a number of solutions that support on-the-land learning, on-the-land isolation, both to keep people safe from the epidemic, mental health and learning opportunities. We've seen that in some of the solutions in and around some of the yearly evacuations we have to do with some communities in Ontario, most notably Kashechewan being one of them. Is last year and this year we supported their traditional hunt on the land instead of going into a more urban setting where the chances of getting COVID are greater and then becoming a vector back into the community. And those have been I would say modest to really good successes. Small examples, but important and significant ones for the communities in question. And then the statement you read is one that we aspire, that guides our relationship. And I wouldn't say we're there yet, but I certainly, and my team, there's a number of Indigenous voices to it, certainly holds us to it, and it's something that we want to keep moving towards.
I appreciate you addressing that. Like I said, like you said, it's a big statement, it's an aspiration, but I appreciate you speaking to it in relation, to the things that are happening on the ground today. So I want to move past the first part of our conversation to the second part, which is what we're here for. Ultimately, is to acknowledge and respect and celebrate Indigenous Day 2021. And June 21st is the date, and it's known as obviously the National Indigenous Day. People, it's a day for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So, just in a nutshell, what does this day and month mean to you?
For me, it's an opportunity to, I guess, give people that look like me, non-Indigenous people, a snapshot into what I do and to how important it is to who we are as a country. I think one of the challenges I've seen quite clearly throughout this is whether we're talking about treaties, rights, whether we're talking about Indigenous issues generally, is the responsibility that we have as government to continue to educate our own and to hold up our own side of the bargain. And it's an uphill battle. I do feel that over the last 5 years, the narrative in the national psyche has shifted. Some really strong awareness as to Indigenous rights. I mean, certainly there are two elements come to mind over the last year. Obviously, in the middle of a global crisis, but other things like the Wet'suwet'en and solidarity movements that seized certainly the media cycle of the country and our I guess we can call ourselves a national consciousness, as well as some of the elements of pride in and around seeing an Indigenous-led business take over the Clearwater, which is a big business of a big lobster fishing company in Nova Scotia, as well as some of the really challenging issues over treaty rights and fisheries. And that all kind of swirled into one. I think perhaps 10 years ago, that wouldn't have grabbed everyone's imagination, or at least seen the support that you've seen over the last little while, year, 2 years, 3 years, with respect to those issues. It makes us as a government very sensitive to the issues, but also aware and taking heart that people that aren't necessarily involved in Indigenous issues every day, mostly non-Indigenous folks, which is the vast majority of Canadians, care about it. But there is some need to continue the education process because it can often be quite superficial.
And I think the idea of Indigenous Day obviously is to educate people, Indigenous or not, about the issues that you talked about just now. And it kind of ties in, to the significance of when this day was passed in the House of Commons back in 2009. Do you feel with the steps that you were talking about and the things that are happening on the ground, plus, this motion of Indigenous Day, is it the right step towards reconciliation? Do you think it's a significant step towards reconciliation?
Yeah, I do. I do have to say that I wasn't aware of the day until I became a politician. So that does say something. And it's not that I don't care. It just didn't occupy, and it wasn't raised perhaps in the way that it probably should have. But that's something that I remind myself of when I speak to people about it. You have to understand what it is. If you simply kind of go through the motions, and then the next day you're on to the next thing, then you can obviously understand some of the criticism that perhaps it should be a year or a month or 2 months or whatever. But you see these with all these recognition days. But this is a very important one because it is a continued effort to raise awareness, and I particularly try to raise awareness during the month of June in and around Indigenous languages, which is very important, I think, for all Canadians to understand.
And I think it's so important to talk about this, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about what Indigenous Day means to you and the importance of it. With COVID, obviously, Indigenous Day is usually celebrated in many shapes and forms, and festivals and educational teachings and a lot of stuff done in person. So, out in Ottawa there, do you know what kind of plans there are, if any? Is there some virtual takes on Indigenous Day that are planned out east?
Yeah, trying to do our best to do things virtually has been a challenge, especially whether it's last year there's only so it's sad, frankly, because we were trying to keep people safe, and you want to gather together, particularly when it comes to some of the sunrise ceremonies that we do. They're fun, they're evocative, and they're a time to reflect on things, as well as all the suite of things you do during the day. Hopefully, I don't know what this year holds.
Yeah.
I hope as this broadcast that it is much more optimistic than I'm looking right now.
Mm-hmm.
I used to organize just as an MP a lacrosse game on the hill, and we had a couple of years of that with local Indigenous team. But we had to cancel that last year, which is really sad because it's a chance for people that don't usually get up to Ottawa to come and toss around lacrosse ball.
That's really nice. Well,
canceled, so sadly,
yeah,
we can't do that this year either.
Yeah, well, I hope, like you said, as we're in May now, hopefully, as we're celebrating this in June, and looking forward to the summer, that things do improve. I like to ask my guests sometimes a surprise question. Kind of relates to the idea of Indigenous Day, and I know for me, Indigenous Day, when I do go to a festival or whatnot, there is some food trucks and some Indigenous, cuisine or whatnot. So what when I speak of Indigenous cuisine, what's your favorite kind of dish you like to experience?
Oh, I like, the tacos are pretty good.
Yeah.
They're fully loaded.
Yeah.
There is walleye. There's like fried walleye where in Montreal that is a big thing.
And walleye's a fish, right?
Yeah, it's a fish.
Okay.
I don't know the genus. I couldn't. You'd have to test me on my Latin.
No, it's okay. I didn't even know it was a fish. So you're one step ahead of me.
Fish, and then the suite of strawberry drinks. So that's kind of the three set of foods that if I'm at a powwow, I'll head towards the stand.
That's great. I like to ask almost all my guests that, because the Indigenous food that you might experience out in Ottawa and the east side of Canada is far different than what I might experience here. I know my last guest, I asked about her favorite dish, and they have like a berry soup out in Manitoba, and I'd never heard of that. So I like asking these questions. So I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, I made the mistake of expressing my preference for a particular sort of bannock once, and it did me no good.
Yeah, no, just use the general umbrella of fried bread, and you might be a little safer that way. All right. Well, thank you so much, Honorable Marc Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. You're coming out of Ottawa here. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to celebrate Indigenous Day with Czech and Vancouver Island, and to be my guest here on my show. So again, Minister Marc, thank you for joining me on Our Native Land.
Thank you so much.